AM, talking Adelaide. This is Adelaide's 5AA.
Good evening. Yesterday, temperatures in Adelaide hit 48.1 degrees, setting a new heat record for an Australian capital city, as what is now being called the Great Heatwave of 2025 heads into the third week. SA Health is still experiencing record admissions due to heat-related illnesses and is urging us all to continue to show extreme caution. Relief is in sight, with the Bureau forecasting the heatwave to come to an end by the weekend. However, this will be replaced by a series of slow-moving thunderstorms travelling east across the state. The Bureau says thunderstorms are expected to initially produce dry lightning, which could trigger bushfires across the Mount Lofty ranges. This will be followed by heavy winds and rainfall in some areas. And rainfall totals of over 50 mils in an hour in southern Adelaide could lead to localised flooding. Police are urging the community to remain vigilant during this period and keep an eye out for suspicious behaviour. In other news, Justin Timberlake has just launched a new clothing line.
Okay, so did you note the subtle shift here on the screen? Now we've gone to blue. We've gone from red and we've gone to blue. And Sean, he's our AV guy up the back. He's been doing a tremendous job tonight with all these slides. Sean, could you, because I think we need to create more of an atmosphere just to denote that there's been yet another weather change. So, Sean, could you give me a wind sound effect? It's not quite the wind sound effect I was thinking of, Sean. Thank you. That sort of wind. So, John, I want to go back to you, because this data that we're flashing up on screen again tonight, 48.1 degrees, this is your data, this is your predictions from years and years and years of science and your giant brain doing what it should do. You know, this is seriously horrendous. 48.1 degrees. We've gone into 3 weeks and now we hear that we're going to have storms and lightning. This is absolutely awful. It doesn't get much worse than this, does it?
We could talk about really catastrophic bushfire danger. Wind strength is built from the thermal wind equation. And that is basically the gradient of heat to cold. And so you'd have to call that a blistering heat wave. So the continent is covered by a huge mass of heat. It will be displaced by the Southern Ocean change, which is a rather cool body of air, and it has to shove against that heat quite hard to get it out. You get the strongest temperature gradient you can possibly build, displacing a record heat wave. This happened in 1939, and it happened in 2009, and we called them epic bushfires, and they are the truly catastrophic bushfire events. So I would say, as we come to the end of an epic heat wave in a drought period, because this is El Nino, that and this is the nature, I think, of disaster scenarios. You've had a disastrous heat wave, communities reeling, you've probably had a lot of economic impacts, environmental impacts, energy impacts, I'm sure, by now. I share with Frank some of his distress, because in a drought year, your water reserves have dropped away, and the bodies of water that are cooling the energy plants are warming, so they're less effective, so they dial down their energy production. So there's all those sorts of effects, and then you throw a big bushfire. And the thing that I feel for Paddy and company is, by the time we have gone through one of these events and we've lost several hundred people, along comes the bushfire and there are the columns of smoke. And no one will pay any attention to the people that died in the heat wave, because it's all turned to the bushfire. It's much more spectacular.
If we've just gone through this massive heat wave and then we've got, like, look at the SES. How do you deal with this? How do you go, oh, thanks guys for putting on the orange suits for the last 2 weeks and getting out there and working in the heat wave, and oh, by the way, now we've got a bushfire and we've got flooding, and, you know, I mean, how do you deal with that?
You know, our volunteers are really the backbone of the emergency management infrastructure in this state, and on the big days they will turn out time and time again to help their communities in need, and that's one of the tremendous strengths in Australia, I think, around our emergency management arrangements generally. But you're quite right that at the end of a large-scale event, whether it's wildfire, storms, extreme heat, a lot of those volunteers are fatigued. They're thinking about when they can get back to work so that they can earn some dollars and put food on the table. And certainly with big events that we've seen in the last couple of years, we've seen volunteer resources stretch to the point where they're struggling to crew their appliances. And what we've seen nationally is that it's not just a South Australian phenomenon, but this occurs in other states and territories as well. And over the last 10 years, we've seen a maturing of arrangements where interjurisdictional support and the provision and call for of resources and those arrangements becomes much more common. And so as recently as last year, when we had those large storms, SES resources were supplemented with hundreds of men and women out of Victoria, out of West Australia, with fleet and appliances that were brought into this state to augment the volunteer resources that we have here. We also called on resources out of the Commonwealth, and again we had hundreds of men and women from the Edinburgh base turned out to support those communities during times of need. And I suspect with this event that we're looking at, we're staring down the barrel of, I'll be quickly handballing over to Chief Officer Nettleton from the CFS, but nonetheless we'll be thinking about what resources are available nationally that we can deploy to any jurisdiction that would be subject to significant events.
Can I ask you, Larissa, how we as a community respond to all of these weather events that are going to get worse and over time? Do we start moving? Do we actually start moving to Tasmania? Was that part of your research, asking people not so much about Tasmania, but do we start looking at other places of less extreme heat to live?
I don't think that's what most people are thinking about at the moment. Not many people suggest to me that they're thinking about moving, and I don't think I can suggest that most of South Australia moves somewhere else. I think we have to look at what we can do locally to make our communities resilient, and all of the people here are obviously doing their bit in working towards that. But I think we're at a point where people are realising there are more heat waves, but they're not yet familiar, necessarily resourced, have the right things in their homes to help them through the heat waves. So we've been through a period the last few decades where about 80% or maybe even more in South Australia of households have installed air conditioning, and in the process most of them or a lot of them have got rid of fans or don't have ceiling fans anymore. And so we've ended up there in a situation where we're using so much power that we are putting the security of our energy supply at risk, and then opening ourselves up to actually potentially having some long periods where we need to try to stay cool without an air conditioner. So I think we're at a point where we're really realising we have a problem, and perhaps we should look at some of the things we were doing before that put less demand on the system, like have ceiling fans, build our homes with high enough ceilings to have ceiling fans, keep water spray bottles in the home, plant
Verandas,
more trees, all
plant
the things.
more trees, no artificial grass.
Exactly. It's just that we're just realising and accepting that this really is the case, and there's a lot of people in the community that are still a bit doubtful about climate change, but the shift is happening because people are experiencing it now. So yeah, I think it's going to have to happen locally, but we're going to have to do really significant things with our infrastructure and our social infrastructure.
John, I'll just go back to you for the final question. We're just about to open the questions to the floor, so if you've got any questions at all, I will be out there with a microphone and you can ask our panel yourself. But, this is real, isn't it, what we are experiencing here in 2025? It's not you just having a few gin and sodas at night thinking, oh, I'll just stuff these people up and whack a few numbers on. I'm the bomb. They wouldn't know anyway. No one knows what my lines mean. Is this, how real is this? Like in 2025, will we all be experiencing this heat?
Okay, so we should learn from our history.
Yep.
And we should learn from the global experiences around the world. In 2010, the Russians suffered a 50-day heatwave, and they lost 56,000 people through that event.
God.
The European heatwave of 2003 is really illustrative. They quickly came to the conclusion that 30,000 people had died across Europe. The estimates now back, because the data keeps on coming in, it's 80,000 people.
Wow.
And then, not only that, I've got some articles that are going around, and the Czechs were having trouble understanding the 2015 heatwave in context of what was going on, and they used this technique, and they were able to demonstrate that the locus of the extreme heatwave that was experienced in 2003 was Western Europe, and the locus of the activity in 2015 was Central Europe. And they had their worst ever impact from heatwave. And only the past summer that Europe experienced, I don't know if anyone paid attention, but in our climate regime, Southern Europe experienced Lucifer, as they called it. And of course, Paddy would know that we won't have the numbers who are impacted from that for some time to come. So one of the really interesting things from heatwave is that the data of impact does not arrive in time for our attention span to grasp it as a community. It's a really, really difficult problem. So I don't expect you to grasp the numbers that I work with and hold them in your head across time, but the thing is, the index that we're using now enables us to use the full climate record. And not only because it only uses maximum and minimum temperature, it's the best data we've got. It's the best data we've got in our forecast data. It's the best data that we can produce in our seasonal outlooks, and it's the best data that we produce in our projection data out to the end of the century. So you've got a really nice tool now, I hope, to look at with one measure what heat waves have looked like in the past, as they're coming at you, and as they're going into the future. And this is a real opportunity to learn from the history of heat waves. And we have forgotten so many lessons that were there in our historical impact record, which you couldn't marry up to our data in the and now we can. It's really nice.
Paddy?
So, and John's absolutely right, is that the predictions that we learnt from in 2009 were employed to put into place strategies in 2014. Yeah. And we actually started to go out very proactively, and hence the idea of the extreme heat wave prediction, and we go out proactively. Red Cross Teleready goes out proactively. There's a lot of messaging, there's a lot of now social media, and in 2014 we didn't see as many adverse events. We didn't see the mortality. We didn't see. We saw the same types of morbidity as in the heat waves that had been prior to the very severe one. Now, so we know that people can do things about this, and that's why we do go out. That's why it is behoven on all of us to look after the other members of our community. But the data is now becoming more sophisticated, the science is becoming more sophisticated, and we are able to predict them much better than we ever have been.
Rose, you want the microphone?
To follow on, Paddy, Telecross Radio, when we first activated it a few years ago, we had about nearly 3,000 people to call. And as we got people to be more prepared, we are ringing about over only 1,000 people now. And that actually shows that people now are more prepared. And I guess for me, the message is, if you know that we are going to have really hot climate, changing climate in 2025, get prepared now. And Red Cross, in fact, we are working with the southern region communities right now we started to work with them to adapt to the changing climate. And to date, I think we probably have about 30 champions who have volunteered to work with us in the southern communities in leading local climate adaptation activities in the community. So I guess if we start now, we will be better prepared.
Has anyone got any questions in the audience for any of our panel members? All right, yes, we do. I'm running down.
I think Marion Council has a very good story to tell in terms of a contribution to making the environment better. So I'm asking Tony Lyons, one of our general managers, about what we're doing in terms of solar panels, LED lighting and planting trees.
So we're doing some huge things. We're converting all of our street lighting to LEDs over the next 3 years. We're actually trying to compress that delivery into 2 years. So that's going to replace every single street light in this city to LEDs. And you can think of the massive carbon emission reduction that that's going to bring. We've got a program now that we're going to start next financial year to plant over 20,000 trees in the next 7 years. So when we get to this 2025 thing that we're talking about, we will have another 20,000 trees in the city. And there's also something really cool that happened just today. And when I say today, I'm talking about today, where we had a helicopter that went along the coastline of Marion and took a picture of all of the coastline. And it's actually going to create a 3D model of that entire coastline. And we've gone along, we've set up about 200 data points of XYZ coordinates, etc., to calibrate that. And that's going to be our baseline for literally the next 100 years of what our coastline looks like today. And then we can compare that, we'll have that in place from now so that we can see the effect of climate change, global warming, the change in sea levels, any erosion that takes place in our cliffs, etc., any impacts. We will literally be able to work out if a boulder disappears from that. So that's some of the baselining we're doing. We've heat mapped our entire council. It has some really cool scientific names that Larissa might be able to interpret for us. But it is good stuff that we know exactly where our hot spots are, where our trees need to go, and that's informing some of our planting regimes.
The problem is we're going for more urban infill, we're going for more houses built on large strips of bitumen, i.e. roads. A lot of people now are getting small buildings with a lot of concrete about them, and they're getting very hot in those houses unless they've got the aircon going all the time.
Look, that is a real concern. And Frank, you must look at some developments, Mawson Lakes being one of them, not that it's in the southern area, but everything faces west. There's no verandas, there's no eaves, there's not the regulation 1.2 even. Everyone's got a stonking big air conditioner. That must make life a bit difficult for you.
I guess it's a bit sensitive and controversial to talk about house designs, but clearly that would help a lot. The air conditioning load makes peak demand go up 2 to 3 times, and I think that's probably contributed to by the houses and their design. So I think we would see some significant benefits from better designs, and hopefully that is going to happen. But I guess it's a community response. I think we have to recognise that we need to make change in many areas. I mean, in our industry, we recognise that we need to make change. We have what used to be called consumers, but they're now producers of energy. So we need to facilitate the exchange of energy between households, for example. So I think climate change requires a community response on many fronts, one of which is housing designs.
Sandy talked about planning and Larissa talked about ceiling fans, about the urban sink effect of black roofs. We're being surrounded by urban infill, and there are 80 to 90% roofs are black, which I understand is a massive contributor to urban heat sinks. Can councils have an impact on that planning regulation at all? We've got 4 councils here. Is there anything that can be done on a local level?
Just in relation to the roof colours, I was involved in a project a little while ago with a hotel that repainted and had reflective coating put on the roof of the building at around West Lakes Way, and they had a significant drop of about 20% in their power consumption for their electricity. So that sort of mindset is really good, and there's technology out there to help do that. In the way of planning, I know with the open space type planning that we talk about, that we're now looking at better ways that we can create cooler spaces. Now, we've done the same thing with the heat mapping through the city of Onkaparinga, and we've looked at some of our park areas, and there's some examples out in the foyer if you want to see the heat mapping of streets and leading into parks where we've got areas that are showing significant red patches and are extremely hot, so they're not inviting for people to come and cool down. So they're generating this global heat mass out in the community. In relation to other development stuff, I guess council does have a space to help out there. But as how that change occurs, that's something that I guess councils need to take on board.
Yeah.
Are we currently experiencing already higher levels of solar radiation, either in the UV spectrum or infrared? Because just recently I've noticed plants in my yard are burning after a couple of days of hot weather where they've never burnt before, and I'd really like to keep my garden alive.
Look, I'm a bit of an avid gardener myself as well. The thing about the solar part of our insulation, the radiation that comes in, it is highly variable, and we're still suffering from some of the ozone hole repair that's going on right now, and there is signs of it repairing. So you can get episodes where the UV will be stronger. I can't give you day by day at the moment, but it is improving. It's being shown to be improving. Most of that sort of damage you see is usually a feature of just how long it's been dry and the loss of moisture available to the plant to cope. So deep soil moisture versus shallow moisture is that type of issue most of the time that you see, rather than the UV as a rule. That's the story there, yeah.
I've just got a small question for Ian and for Noel. I don't know which one of you wants to answer them. Maybe both of you want to answer this, but this is to do with public safety, because Ian, obviously you've spoken about what happens to the rough sleepers and those people that are homeless. A lot of those people do suffer from other perhaps mental illnesses or issues with addiction. Do you find that the heat and these sorts of circumstances actually do make them a bit more agitated? And how do you and how does SAPOL cope with that? And how do our prisons cope with that?
Well, from our perspective, I mean, it certainly exacerbates people's health and well-being, which means that sometimes it can tip people over the edge at times. We have a brilliant relationship with SAPOL. We are on the front foot along with SAPOL all the time there. So, and partly that's about making sure that, you know, their well-being's looked after, and that the community's looked after as well. We have to be pretty proactive in our little part of the world too, because it's quite a beautiful little spot, the southeast corner of the city, and sometimes people don't always want to see homeless people in that area, even though we've been there for 60 odd years. So yeah, it certainly exacerbates issues, and we not only see rough sleepers, we see people in boarding houses and public housing, so those places don't have any cooling or heating, and they really struggle through that. So often Hutt Street's the place to be, so because we've got at least some cooling conditions for them. But I love the ideas in 2025 where, you know, we're looking at a rebuild. Maybe we can get a pool on top of Hutt Street as well. And but certainly, you know, things that we probably haven't really thought of enough, but just utilising the like Westfield and those places as well, because a lot of our group do go there anyway. So they hang out during the day because it is a cool space. And I remember I lived in Papua New Guinea when I was a kid, so and they always talked about go to the cooler place, and then in Darwin the same thing. The coolest place was the cinema. So yeah, we try to do the same thing with our group. I'll hand over.
Yeah, thanks. Look, we don't try and arrest our way out of trouble. When people need assistance and the police turn up, we don't have a one card trick. We do refer people off to shelters. From an emergency management perspective, whether it's at the state level or at the local policing level, we work together with all the agencies. We have some really good plans in place and great relationships, and very much we come together to problem solve. And certainly whether it would be a code red or a code blue in winter, if we found people in trouble, we would actually take them there. We're just not going to cut people loose. And that's a very important message that We're about helping the community. Community safety is the most important thing to us.
We are running out of time, and our panellists have put so much time into this evening. I know you all have so many questions. They will be in the foyer. And we gave this question to each of our panellists. We said, what's the one thing? Because you go to these events and you can feel a bit helpless. You know, that's how I feel. Like, God, the temperature's getting hotter and there's nothing I can do. What can I actually do? What is the one individual action I can take today to make the world a better place? So we're giving you the take-home message. We'll start with you, Bob. What's the one thing that we can do?
I have 3 children under 13, and I might look young, but I'm very old. The future of this planet, once my child was born, was suddenly so important. And I think what's happened is that we have lost a whole generation involved in politics. And the gentleman over there, I think you're spot on. How do we give voice to this younger generation, because it's my generation and older who have created this and are refusing to do anything about it. You know, I think that's the important thing. That's what I would like to do. So I don't have air conditioning. I have everything I can to keep my house cool without that, and I'm modelling that to my children, and hopefully my children will grow up with that attitude, and the children at our schools will do so. But as teachers, we give voice to this generation so that they can be the change agents, because they will be our politicians in the future.
Yeah, you're absolutely spot on. And Bob, you are an exceptional principal as well. And if it wasn't for the snakes, I would love my kids to be a hackermeist. Rose, what is the one thing we can do?
Firstly, if you know someone who lives alone, who are at risk, then refer them to Telecross Ready. If you have some spare time and would like to be a volunteer with Red Cross to do Telecross Ready calls, please feel free to see some of my volunteers colleagues at the foyer. And I guess the last message is be prepared. We have community educators also in Red Cross that go to groups to provide information and advice on the Ready plan.
Thank you. Sandy. Yeah, good on you, Rose.
Well, I think the most important thing is to understand all of the kind of information that we're talking about tonight, but don't go to despair, go to action. And I think that is the danger when you sort of hear about some of the things we've thought about tonight, and instead of feeling sort of disempowered, and we've talked about power, think about what you can do. And it doesn't have to be expensive. You can get your kids to quit straws, you can grow some native plants in your garden, you can, advocate and lobby about the planning system. There are things you can do that don't cost you money, and there are things that you can do that next time you're making a decision where you're spending money, you make that right decision. And I feel like consumer choice is a big place that we can all work on, and community education is another one. And I feel like the public servant who's making 1 point with 27 sub-points, so I'll stop there.
Thank you, Sandy. Sandy Pitcher. Professor Paddy Phillips, what can we do?
So learn how to be healthy in the heat, and teach your children, friends, neighbours and relatives how to stay healthy in the heat. And use the SA Health resources. Monica Nitschke was giving them out at the door, but also on our website. Learn how to stay healthy in the heat.
Thank you, Paddy. And if you're feeling a bit dizzy, just have a glass of water before you go racing off in an SA ambulance to the emergency department. It's not always the knock of the death angel. Just maybe have a glass of water. Dr. Larissa Nichols, please tell me what we can do.
I think we could be getting to know our communities better, so we know who might be vulnerable. For those of you who are in poor quality housing and have health issues or are elderly, it's never nice to say you're vulnerable, but people do need to identify themselves and put their hand up for help, as well as the people that have the good quality homes and the air conditioning. be ready, know who in your community you could invite over in the worst days, and make those pairings so that we can share the air conditioning that is going on at those times. And in the future, as the technology gets better, hopefully people can actually donate their excess solar-generated energy specifically to other vulnerable households at those times, so that they can freely use their air conditioning or their fans
What a
without
great
concern.
idea. What a great idea. John.
Just to take your indulgence for a moment to acknowledge the patience of my employer for bringing in a new discipline into the Bureau. Also, the Churchill Trust Fellowship that I used to go around the world to investigate heatwave practices around the world. And also the patience of the University of Adelaide for my very, very, very part-time PhD. Trust the data. We're building really, really high-quality data that you can use. Trust the data. We're not in the post-truth era. We can use science really well.
Yeah.
And you have to be advocates for us because we can't speak up for it. We'll do the work. You need to trust the data. And we're not finished investigating the data. So keep asking the questions of us so that we can give you better data. And I hope you use it.
Thank you. Tony.
Local government's not in a bad place. Our roads might melt a little bit. You'll still be able to drive on them. Our bins might take an extra day to collect. We'll pick them up. If the power's on, you'll be able to come to our libraries and our pools. But what we are trying to do is to green our suburbs to make them a cooler place for you to live in. So as part of our 20,000 trees, for example, we're going out at the moment to engage with our community to get feedback on that. I'd love you to tell us we want those trees. We'd like more trees. We'd like more funding towards making our communities cooler and greener. And this might sound perversely bizarre, but when we go to all the trouble of picking a healthy specimen from a great species and consult with our people and plant the thing, we get people that pull them out. And we also get people that come out with hot water and burn them. So one of our things and one of our directions in our communities is to make the communities that we live in a greener place, a cooler place. And you can support us do that. Thank you.
Yeah, totally. And, you know, if anyone burns their plants, bloody ring SAPOL, can you? Just, you know, Jesus, that's terrible, burning the plants. Is that an offence? Needs to be. You need to take care of that one. All right, Craig.
Okay, I completely support everything as a local government that Tony said. But the other thing I would do is, make sure you know what community facilities are nearby that you can actually seek refuge in. And do a first aid course would be another thing that I would say. Prepare yourself for injuries in hot weather. There's too many people out there that do suffer hot weather injuries and people don't know how to deal with it.
Thank you, Craig. Lovely Frank. Never met a Frank I don't like.
Okay, my answer is in three parts, if I may. What do they say about thinking globally and act locally? So I think one of the challenges we have as a community, and I mean that in the sort of holistic sense, is having a uniform policy on energy. I think that would help us a lot to plan how we're going to go from where we are now to where we need to go. So that's at the big end of town. As an organisation, ourselves and other utilities around the country are enabling or getting their networks, enabling them to share energy, as Larissa was saying, so that somebody's excess energy can be shared with somebody else's, can be taken by somebody else, consumed by somebody else. So facilitating that is one of the big focuses we have as an industry. And just locally, I guess, energy efficiency. Think energy efficiency. Keep the sun out of your home. Curtains. Don't open the fridge for longer than you have to. My wife sometimes leaves the air conditioner on when nobody's home. I don't suggest you do that because that's consuming too much. So I think those are some of the things that we can do.
Thank you for that, Frank. And let's hope all the load levels are okay over the next couple of weeks, and we will all think of you if they're not, you poor thing. Now, Ian Cox, Hutt Street Centre, there you'll be tomorrow night. And isn't it tomorrow night it's going to be open?
Yep.
Good on you.
And the next couple of nights too, I think. So, look, we're already preparing now, and I think the great thing is we're in partnership with the Red Cross, CQ Uni, a number of other DCSI is our funder. So we're already preparing kits now and communication and information for our friends on the street, and I think that's the beauty about today as well. Just I love that message about sharing resources, and if we can do that as a collective, well, then we're in a far better place.
And sometimes even just say hi. Would you like a glass of water?
Yeah, that's a bonus as well.
Yeah,
and especially
absolutely.
when they're doing it pretty tough.
Yeah, don't walk past the homeless. Don't walk past the homeless. Chris Beattie.
The SES is in the business of building community resilience and also responding to the consequences of these events. So that the one take-home message from me is around a whole of community response to be proactive and to take protective behaviours, whether that's protective behaviours for yourself in terms of your own personal behaviours and how you stay healthy during these events, whether it's protecting your loved ones and neighbours, your pets, or indeed you're protecting your workforce in terms of thinking about their welfare under the conditions. So I think being proactive and recognising that these risks are real, the hazard is real, the exposure is real, our vulnerabilities are real, and the consequences are going to continue to be realised in the coming decades.
Thank you so much. Finally, Noel.
Last but not least, I hope.
No, not least at all.
Thank you. A lot's been said along the table. You come to be the last person standing. I'd like to reassure everybody, and that's to reassure you that pretty much everybody along this table, whether it be personally or by their organisation or agency, is represented in our state emergency arrangements. We get together regularly, we have plans, we exercise, and when it comes time to respond, we actually all work together because we all collectively care about the community. We want to make sure that the community is safe and there's no animosity or patch protection when the chips are down. And now it doesn't matter whether it's a heat wave or a bushfire or a storm or a flood, we're all in it together. And a lot of people, I think, don't realise that it's more than just police, fire and ambulance. It is the other government agencies. And so I'd like to thank everybody here for their contribution tonight, and also thanks very much for your cooperation when we all do have to get together and we have to respond.
Thanks, Noel. So, ladies and gents, we're about to wrap it up, but I think this has been a huge collaborative effort. So if we can please put our hands together for our 4 councils. Onkaparinga, Mitcham, Holdfast Bay and Marion, in partnership with the SES, the Australian Red Cross and the Government of South Australia, Adelaide and Mount Lofty Ranges Natural Resource Management Board. Thank you all so much for the efforts that you've put in to bringing this event to the people. Thank you, we really do appreciate it. Our panellists have been amazing. Each and every one of you contributed your own individual and unique perspective on these events. So ladies and gents, one more time, a round of applause for our panellists, please.